Hi, my name's Nick Morgan. I'm with Learning Forward. In the short video you're about to watch, we're going to cover the tools for continuous improvement that we use in the Texas NSI. We center our work around a couple different cycles of inquiry. The big one we call the coach's whistle, sometimes internally, and it's what you see here to the right. We start with establishing a vision for our work, which is basically a definition of what success will look like over the length of the grant cycle in this case. And then we break that down into 4 discrete steps. One is assessing where we are right now. The second is learning to inform what action we're going to take. The third is planning and prioritizing that action. And then fourth is implementing the action and gathering data around it. We're going to take a deeper dive into that fourth stage about some tools that we're using in the Texas NSI that sometimes are known as improvement science. So we are using a variety of different frameworks from improvement science, which is a set of tools and processes that have been cobbled together from the last 50 years and have had history in other sectors of the economy and have made great progress in the world of healthcare, and over the last decade or so are making greater inroads in education. And they are a nice structure for us to use in this work, and you'll learn a fair bit more about those in the next few minutes. So the center of the work really is our hub, and Learning Forward, Educate Texas, and the Dana Center at the University of Texas are the 3 organizations that form the hub. The guiding principles of what we do is these big thematic contributions on the left. Collaboration, we want to drive mutual accountability across the participating organizations. We want to support knowledge sharing, not only across the 3 hub organizations, but across the participating members. We want to support each other, and we want to have the right feedback in place to support the work and make it happen the best way possible for participating members. So let's get to the tools. So the network itself is trying to structure our inquiry process. So the key questions are the big 3 up here, and each one of these has a tool or a set of tools and processes that go along with it. So that vision that was on the previous page, what are we really trying to accomplish here? What is that? How do we articulate that in a nice, crisp way? The first tool we call an aim statement. That is the language that's used in improvement science. Elsewhere, this might feel very similar to what you've done in other projects, like a vision statement. The improvement science lexicon calls this an aim statement, but a nice, simple way of expressing what we're trying to accomplish. In other ways, what does success look like? The second one is captured as a theory of improvement, or what improvement science we call a driver diagram. So the question here is, how are we going to get to that vision? How are we going to realize the aim? So what change are we going to introduce, and why? And the big thing here is the why. The driver diagram helps us organize the logic about why, and helps us take whatever evidence and research and other things that are out there to help us make good decisions around prioritization and figure out what change we're going to introduce and how we're going to measure it, which is the third category. How are we going to know if a change is an improvement or not? And there are a family of measures that we are developing and that we use for this overall project and grant. And they divide into a couple different levels. The family of measures starts at the top with strategic measures, or strategic level measures that are answering the question about whether we're successful or not, and our progress toward the aim statement. Then this cycle at the bottom of the page, the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, or PDSA cycle, is a specific, much more granular set of measures that are designed to help us measure whether that change idea is being successful or not. And so each time we run a Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, we're gathering very timely data to understand whether the change we're trying out is helping us on this pathway toward the definition of success that we have further above. And we're going to tackle each one of these in turn for the rest of this video. And lastly, I think I'd mentioned this, but this is a continuous improvement cycle, as is the bigger theory of inquiry that we have. These are all designed to have a feedback loop that helps us get better at getting better. And those are themes that you will see throughout the work. And the notion of a PDSA cycle and the lexicon that's in use here very much comes from the world of improvement science. So what is an aim statement? How do we depict a driver diagram? And how do we pick a change idea? So they're shown in kind of simple ways, like you see here. Typically, a driver diagram is expressed as sort of a logic path that is, what you see here on the slide is sort of a simplified version of that. And what you might find in a driver diagram is that you have several layers of drivers here. There might be a primary driver, a secondary driver, and in some rare cases, there might even be a tertiary driver. But pretty much if we're getting to a second level of drivers, we have a pretty good idea of a change idea that we want to test. So a driver is a key leverage point in the system. So if I've asked myself, here's a definition of success, or here's what I'm specifically trying to accomplish, those drivers are going to be the biggest levers that I have, and I'm going to break it down in a nice organized way where the drivers don't overlap with each other to figure out which is the best lever for me to pull. And then as I move to the right on my logic model or my driver diagram, I will start to isolate pretty specific change ideas that are going to be good things to test that I might say, if I do this well, if this change idea is successful, this driver is going to lead me to greater success on this aim. And so there's a few different ways that we talk about these structures and the way they break out, but all of the participating organizations in the Texas NSI have been tasked with writing an aim statement. And that aim statement can be revised and updated over the cycle of the network. The driver diagram has been developed typically at the school level, but not in all cases. And then from there, specific change ideas are being tested at the school level. And so all of these are flexible. They can be revised based on new information, new data that we're getting, new learning that we have from those continuous improvement cycles that we're running, the PDSA cycles. But this is the basic structure, and this is the lexicon that is used in improvement science: the aim statement, the driver diagram, and the change idea. So how do these things actually work together? Together, they kind of formulate our theory of action, which is language that many educators have used in other improvement efforts that they've done. And this is a different way of expressing that theory of action. You can look at the syntax here on the slide. If we want to improve whatever our aim statement says, then we need to focus on that primary driver, secondary driver, and so on. And one way to do that is, and that's the change idea that we're going to be testing. So the aim, the driver, and the change idea work well together. And really what we're looking for is a systematic approach that uses real data and very intentional structures and timing to gather that data so that we're making the decisions on what's working and what's not in a smart way. And we're using that data over time, that we have something to actually talk about with our peers in other campuses and other districts and say, hey, this is what we're seeing here. How do we share? How do we get smarter together? So it is the language and the structure that we can use to exchange those ideas across campuses and across participants. The core piece of this is the testing cycle that we do. This is expressed in the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle. So, or commonly known as a PDSA cycle. PDSA cycles are all over the place. They have existed for a long time in manufacturing, they're in healthcare, we've used them in education actually for a long time, all the way from central office issues down to classroom issues. And this structure from improvement science gives the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle kind of a nice home and a structure for gathering that information, sharing it, and actually building sort of a scaffolding for for making decisions over time, whether we're actually making progress toward that bigger aim. So the 4 steps here are the plan, which is what is the change we're going to pursue and why? And there's an important part here about making a prediction. So what do we think is going to happen when we put that change in place? And the PDSA process actually forces us to write that down, because it's important as we go through this cycle that we compare that original prediction to what actually happens and what data we gather. It helps reduce all kinds of biases that we typically have in how we think about change and change management in our organizations. The second step is the do, which is actually executing the test. We're going to collect data, we're going to document what's happening, we're going to do this in a structured way so that no matter who's collecting the data, we have it in a similar way so that it's comparable and so that we can have good dialogue. The third step is studying those results. So how do my actual results compare to the prediction that I did in the plan step? Was I way off? Was I really close? Why was I way off, or why was I really close? What did we learn, and what are we going to do next time? So that moves us to the 4th step, which is the A, or the act. And typically we break this down into 3 broad categories: adapt, adopt, or abandon. So we've tested this change idea, and maybe we've tested it a few times, or maybe we need to test it a few more times before we have the confidence to make a really good decision here. So we might adapt, we might tweak it just a little. We might say, that wasn't really working. Let's, try something a little bit different, but it's really the same sort of flavor. So that's considered adapt. Adopt is when we have such a high confidence level that we're going to move it to the next level of scaling. We may be going from 1 classroom to 2 classrooms, or we may be going from 1 classroom to the whole school, or we may be going from the school to the whole district. But that's what adopting means. It's moving to that next level of scale in the process. And then the third A is abandon, where we also have a high degree of confidence that whatever change idea we've been testing is not working. We want to scrap this. It's not a good use of our time and effort. Let's try something different. So again, those are conversations that are based on the data that's being gathered through this process. So when we do this, we hope to have a lot of data coming in. We want to do as many cycles as we can, whatever is appropriate for the timeline that we have and the test of the whatever change idea that we're pursuing. But the idea here is that confidence is built through the data, that the decisions we're making about adapting, adopting, and abandoning, and really figuring out what works where and when under different test conditions is being gathered, documented, and discussed among the decision-making teams in your schools and your districts. So over time, we're going to be running a lot of PDSA cycles. And over time, we're going to be sort of using this structure to go from this idea that we have some initial hunches and ideas we don't really know, but this is worth trying out. We think this has promise. There's some research that we've read, or someone tried this once and it seemed to have a good effect, or I think I can do something in my classroom that seems to be working. But how do we really know that that change is actually an improvement? Well, the PDSA data from the previous slide is what needs to help us answer that and drive that scaling process with confidence that we're making the right decision for scaling these new opportunities. So we start with typically very small scale tests, especially if we're not confident in the test that we're pursuing. Follow-up tests, we might expand that scale. And then we might actually have very broad scale tests and say, before we really roll this out full blown across, whatever scope, before we roll this across the district, let's say, we have to have some wide scale tests. We need to see what happens, right? This may work in one kind of campus, but not in another. So it might work well, with a certain kind of population of students, and it might not work well with another one. Let's test that. Before we actually have a full-blown adoption of that change idea. And really what this is all driving toward, it's driving toward that aim statement. But the key thing here, and sort of, again, thinking about improvement science, is that this is quality with reliability at scale. And so the PDSA process and the testing process is going to help us drive on that pathway. And So the way this actually works and the decision makers and the dialogue that goes around it is a big part of what we're here to support with, the facilitation process that we have in the Texas NSI, as well as the dialogue that you're expected to have with your colleagues, can happen in a variety of different formats. They can be unique sessions. This can be rolled into existing PLC or teacher-based team structures. These can be building leader teams, and so forth. But the fact that the PDSA dialogue needs to happen and have a home in certain places are things that we will work with you on, and giving sort of a place where the rigor of the PDSA process can be applied to that adopt, adapt, or abandon decision making. All hoping that we move through these structures and using these structures to come back to quality with reliability at scale. And if we find that the changes that we're testing don't work and that we're not seeing the kinds of changes we want to see, we want to come back to those driver diagrams and the analysis that went into the creation of those driver diagrams. Things like new types of root cause analysis, new types of data analysis, perhaps expanding the drivers that are being considered, until we sort of find the pathways that are really going to be making a difference on the data that we see, the results that we see, in making a change in that aim level result that we're shooting for. So this has been a brief overview of the tools, the lexicon that we're using in the Texas NSI. There are templates and formats for each of these that the facilitators, both at your local site facilitators and the hub facilitators, are equipped with. And many of you are probably already familiar with these, but it's the pulling it all together that really makes the magic work in the Texas NSI. So the last thought here for this particular video is that the way we hope all of this to work together is that this networked improvement model really is a shift, hopefully, in the way decisions are made. So not only are you thinking about decisions in a slightly different way in your campuses and in your districts, but in the cross-district collaboration and then the collaboration that you have with the 3 hub organizations, that we together are learning fast to implement well. So thinking of the PDSA cycles, thinking of the data that's being gathered is all about learning fast, but it also has a very, very laser-like focus on implementation and implementing well to drive those scaling decisions and to make sure that when things are scaled, that they are likely to work and that they are working in those scaling opportunities. So that's it for this video. Thanks for joining. This has been a quick overview of the improvement science tools and the other tools and lexicon that we use in the Texas NSI. Hope to see you in person. Thanks. Bye-bye.